A legendary woman for our guest, Helen Delich Bentley. And I am so pleased to be able to have you on today.
Thank you, Kate. I'm delighted to be here.
As I was reading information about you, one of the things that jumped out was that I realized you were from Ruth, Nevada, which is very, very isolated and landlocked. It's in high desert. And how you made it out to Baltimore.
It is extremely landlocked. It is 35 miles north of Las Vegas, 330 miles east of Reno, and 220 miles west of Salt Lake City. And it's 8,000 feet above sea level. So it is landlocked. How did I get out of there? Well, my mother was determined that I was going to go to college. Even though our income, we had nothing. Mm-hmm. She was a widow. And in that tiny town, the only employment there were in the mines. So she kept boarders. And it was because of the boarders that we were able to survive. My older sisters had gone on, and my two brothers were, one brother had gone into the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC camp, and my other brother was finishing high school, and he did not want to go on to college because he really didn't want to go. That was it. He put down such demand that it couldn't happen. So my mother concentrated on me, and my dear mother. And I went to the University of Nevada the first year, because they did have a good journalism school, and that's what I decided I would go for, because I could not afford law school. And after the first year there, where I worked as a secretary or an aide in the agriculture department, I then worked on a senatorial campaign. I'd never been around politics before, but this candidate for the U.S. Senate, coming through the small town of Ely, was our capital, or our center for activity in White Pine County. And I was working on the weekly paper there, and this candidate came through and said, we need somebody to run the campaign in White Pine County.
You were a teenager when you were doing this.
I was a teenager. I was a freshman out of college going into my sophomore year somewhere. And I learned fast. And you know what? What I learned that year, back in 1942, still applies today when you're campaigning. You go around and talk to the people and sit with them and shake their hands and do it personally. And that's what I did. And we carried the county. And we carried the next county. I did 2 counties. And so the senator offers me a position with his. Now, I had meanwhile transferred to the University of Missouri. because Missouri had a better journalism school than Nevada. And at Missouri, I had the great job of clerking in a drugstore for 10 cents an hour.
Oh, wow.
But it helped pay the way. I had 2 $500 scholarships. And so then I went on. I left Missouri after that semester, came back to Washington, stayed there that semester and the summer, and I went to George Washington University at night. I hated it. I did not like Washington at all. I did not like the constituents coming in and asking for favors in the Senate office.
You were with the United
I was
Press?
working for United Press in Indianapolis. After 3 weeks there, they sent me to Fort Wayne, to what they called a one-man bureau. And in that one-man bureau, I did very well.
Well, one-woman bureau.
Well, it was a one-person bureau, I should say.
Yes.
And I did very well. They had what they called the red papers, and those were the fillers that all of the offices sent in constantly, little bits that newspapers could use to fill in space.
Right.
And I did very well with those. In fact, I think I led the country in United Press offices with the fillers. So I wanted a promotion. They had an opening in Detroit, night manager. They finally agreed to give that to me, but they weren't going to give me any more money because I was then at scale. So I decided, nuts, I'm not going to take it. I found out about a job in Lewiston, Idaho, and I went to Lewiston, Idaho. You remember, I was young and...
You were an adventurer.
I was an adventurer. 2 weeks in Lewiston, I said, this is not for me. I was the night editor, and that meant working from 3 p.m. in the afternoon to about 3 a.m. every morning, 6 nights a week. Oof. That was not for literally a teenager. And I wrote to every paper in the East and said, I want to come back East. But I want a reporter's job. I got a response from the Louisville Courier, which offered me a rim job. That again was editing. And I decided that was better than what I was doing. And I think they did give me $5 more a week. And then as I was packed and ready to go to Louisville, I got a telegraph from Baltimore, from McLean Patterson at the Baltimore Sun. And McLean not only offered me $5 a week more even, but he's going to pay my way from the West Coast. I jumped at it, and that's where I went.
Well, that was a great deal.
And I figured then I'd come for 2, 3, 4 months and find something else. I've never left, as you know. I like Baltimore, I like the paper, and as I moved from a general reporter to labor editor to the maritime division, I'm still here. I'm still fighting for the port.
Well, that's what I found fascinating, is how you went from all these landlocked jobs to being such an expert on maritime issues.
Well, you had to work at it. You had to learn. I had a lot of men who were very willing teachers, and they were so happy to have the port covered. They were so happy that the Sun paper gave a lot of space to the port at that time. And I had a managing editor who said, Helen, we believe in what you're doing. We want to make sure that the Port of Baltimore competes with the other ports. We're leaving it in your hands. We're supporting you. Don't screw up. And so that's really what happened. My managing editor, Buck Dorsey, he succeeded McLean Patterson. And they were very good to me.
Well, having somebody who would support you and be your mentor is wonderful, but then also having the talent to follow through and not screw up, as they say.
Well, let's say maybe not talent as much as determination. And one thing I did learn in journalism school, you had to be accurate. And you had to be honest. And I placed my integrity and my accuracy, as well as my determination, as the reasons why I was successful and able to be successful. And
it's true grit.
That's it, true grit. Yeah. And I did it.
Well, Baltimore has certainly been the beneficiary of your true grit and your hard work.
Well, when you go back, 1950, you know, television was just getting started. And a couple of the gentlemen around the port thought, the port needs to be promoted more. And we need a television show about the port. And so Rex Wheeler Sr. and Sam Shapiro talked to me about it. And we talked and we talked. And I said, well, I talked to WMAR, which was then owned by the Sun paper, and said, what can we do? And they said, Helen, we can put a half-an-hour show on every week. You're going to have to do it. You're going to have to raise the money for it. You're going to have to do all the work. But we'll give you the airtime. We'll sell you the airtime. Wasn't it? They did not give me the airtime. They sold me the airtime. And so I worked on that. And that television show, together with what I was doing on the paper, both of them together, worked very well together. And
the port that built a city.
Influences all the towns immediately in this area, as well as going out to the entire state of Maryland, as we pointed out recently. All of these towns in this area have industries that involve importing and exporting over on into the eastern shore.
Well, Helen, it's a great pleasure being able to repeat this history of the Port of Baltimore.
the first major breakthrough that we were able to do that benefited not only the port, the city, and the state, but all of Maryland, really, was when we fought the railroads, who really owned the terminals at the port. And they were not allowed, they didn't want truck traffic.
Oh.
And the trucks were coming on, and people wanted to move stuff by truck. So we began the fight that Maryland needed a public agency. Norfolk had one at that time. New York had one. Philadelphia had one. And they were starting to beat our socks off. So we went to the state legislature. Governor McKeldin was very helpful there. He appointed a committee. And to see what we could do, we went to the state legislature in 1955. We lost our battle then because the railroads were against us. The Association of Commerce was against us. The Gas and Electric Company was against us. You know, why? So the day after the legislature ended, we began our fight for the next year. At that time, Dr. Mildred Tenisek, who was then the Democrat National Committee woman, and a wonderful lady, she was on the committee that Governor McKeldin had appointed. Bob Bunnell, who was then State Roads Commission chairman. Bill Boucher, who was then the executive director of the recently formed Greater Baltimore Committee. So we worked together. Now, I wasn't formally on the committee, but I was working with them every day because I had the background, they didn't. And we were able then, we got the gas and electric company turned around and they supported us. Oh, dear Charlie Craig. And the railroads, of course, never did because they didn't want to give up. But we were able to get everybody else. In the meantime, also, because I had the television show going, the Port of Villa City, I brought some of the state legislators on my show. Louis Goldstein, the first time Louis had ever been on a television show. And Louis was enamored, and he, of course, was Speaker of the House. So he led that charge. We had George Della, who was a state senator then, senior, and George was then, I think, the president of the Senate, and he led that charge. We had Fred Malkus from the Eastern Shore. We had Harry Phoebus from the Eastern Shore. Got them involved. And so it was that network that helped us push through the legislation in the next session, 1956. The Maryland Port Authority went into business formally on July 1st of 1956. And it's been a public agency ever since and been able to do things. It was changed in 1970 and was placed under the Department of Transportation, not as an independent agency anymore. But things have worked out pretty good under that department. And then the next big breakthrough that I was really involved in was when I ran for Congress.
Right.
I ran for Congress because my predecessor then, the guy who was in office then, Clarence Long, was blocking the deepening of the ship channels coming up to Baltimore. Now, when we started that fight, I go back even before then, when we were first starting for a 42-foot channel, around 1958 or 60, somewhere there, the then chairman of Bethlehem Steel Corporation said, "You people in Maryland are wasting taxpayers' money. There'll never be ships that big." This was 42 feet. Within a year, he had to take his words back because the world's first supertanker was being ordered, and it was being ordered down here at Sparrows Point, the shipyard, by none other than Aristotle Onassis,
Oh my.
the big Greek shipowner.
Absolutely. There we hear the chimes again.
Yes, we do. They're beautiful, and they fit right in with the atmosphere.
Oh, Aristotle Onassis had ordered that first big supertanker.
J.M. Willis, Jack Willis, was Bethlehem's top guy in shipbuilding here. J.M. was probably, and always will be in my book, the world's best shipbuilder. He was responsible for the 609 ships that we built in Baltimore during World War II.
Wow.
In the 3 shipyards we had, 3 Bethlehem. Jack was in charge. And when you get 4 ocean-going ships, I mean not 4, in 4 years, you get 609 ocean-going ships completed. Right here, we had the steel mills, etc. We were able to do it, and Jack did that. And so Jack had, the Greeks were in awe of him. We got a lot of contracts from the Greeks at that time. But the first was this supertanker. And Aristotle Onassis built it here. And he went on to international fame after that. Anyhow, that ship, that was going to draw 42 feet of water. So we were right on target then. So I decided in looking and studying and listening and all of that you do, we had to have a 50-foot channel, or we were not going to make it. We were not going to survive. Ships had to come 150 miles up Chesapeake Bay. That was a negative. The ships made money when they were not in port or limited. And so I began my campaign.
So you had to coordinate the business end of it and the developers and the...
All of it. On the TV show, I planned all of the shows. I went out with a photographer. I worked with the editing of the films every day, and I wrote the scripts, and I was on the show. So I was bouncing from one to the other, did all of it for 15 years. That show went on for 15 years. And I ended up when we went from black and white to color televisions, because I knew the costs were going to go up. And I never did explore really how much more the cost would be. But I ended it then.
Is that when you began your congressional runs?
No. 4 years later, after I ended the show, 3 years later, Richard Nixon was running for president. I, meanwhile, did have my newspaper column was carried in about 20 papers around the country, and that was a semi-weekly column. And so with that, I got to know the people who were in public office in Washington more than ever, and one of them was Richard Nixon, who read my columns. And he decided he wanted me to help them with the sea power. So when they approached me, I said, well, I can help you, but you have to understand, if the other side asks me to help them, I have to help them too. Now, I knew the Humphrey people, but I did not know the Nixon people before. But the Humphrey people never came to me. So I worked with the Nixon people on their sea power stuff. And then came the task of getting a federal appointment. And I was a woman. And the guys in Washington still had their noses, looked down their noses at women. The first proposal was made to me by Ed Luckenbach, who was then working on the transition team of maritime administrator. That's what I really wanted, because that was promoting the American Merchant Marine. Ed, one thing Ed said, he said, Helen, you got to get labor support. Well, I had, coincidentally, just a day or two before, had all of the top shipping people at a dinner in New York to discuss how are we going to save the American shipping industry. I had the labor leaders, I had the ship owners, I had the shipbuilders, etc. 52 people. So I thought, this is going to be easy. Well, I started with the unions, because he said you need to get them. And the first union, the Marine Engineers, fine. Jesse Calhoun, fine. The Master Mason Pilots, fine. Came to the Seafarers Union, Paul Hall. And he said, well, I don't know about that, Helen. And this went on for a week. Now, I had just 2 days before spent 11 hours sitting in his office in Brooklyn. Before the dinner, it was the day of the dinner, the day before, talking about what needed to be done. I don't know about that, Helen. I said, what are you saying, Paul? Well, I never heard that they were offering you anything. This went on and on. Finally, Luckenbach calls me. He says, Helen, what happened? You lost. I said, I'll tell you what happened. Paul couldn't control me. He did not make the offer to me. And he was not going to support me. So I confronted Paul about that at a labor meeting down in Florida, where I went for the paper, the newspaper, cover the labor meeting. And I asked Paul to go to breakfast. And I said, what happened, Paul? Well, you know, Helen, when I want to do something, even if it's moving a broom from a corner in the kitchen somewhere else, I pre-plan that. I said, oh, what you're telling me is that because it was not given to me through you, so you could pre-plan, you weren't going to support me. And he said, you're perceptive.
How infuriating.
I picked up the check, paid it, and left. I was furious. Later, probably the next day, there was an issue that came up involving American flag ships and cargoes. And I was called. And I had to talk to him. And I said, well, I'm bigger than he is. So I did. I said, this is our problem. We got this problem with cargoes on these ships, American flag. Are you going to be with us or against us? And he was with us. But I was out. Then came the Assistant Secretary of Transportation for public policy or communications, one of them. And it was offered to me. And the guys who wanted me was the Undersecretary of Transportation, Jim Beggs, who knew me, and Baker, Charlie Baker, who was then the third guy at Transportation, both of whom knew me from Wick. They wanted me. John Volpe, the secretary. A woman can't handle that job. So John Volpe did not hire me. And they gave it to a man that they had to fire 3 months later. And I laughed. Along came the Federal Maritime Commission. And there was a commission seat and the chairmanship open. I was offered the commission seat. And I turned it down. I said, I want the chairmanship. I'm qualified. The man you're going to give it to doesn't even know what a ship is. He's a political friend from Ohio, Warren, Ohio. I said, I'm not going to make him look good. So I turned it down. This was like July 9th of 1969. Coincidentally, 4 Republican congresswomen had an appointment with President Nixon the next day to talk about female appointees. And the president said, you go out and get Helen Bentley on the Federal Maritime Commission. We need her expertise. So Peg Heckler, who was the congresswoman from Massachusetts, Margaret Heckler, called me up. I said, I appreciate your call, but this is the story, and I'm not going to take anything but chairman. Peter Flanagan told Margaret Heckler and the other 3 congressmen, no way that was a committed seat. And so I said to Margaret, I said, that's discrimination. But I learned that the chairman of the Civil Aeronautics Board, the airplane regulatory agency, was open. And I'd been covering for the newspaper the whole transportation picture. So I knew the CAB. So I said, Peggy, I'll take the CAB chairmanship. She came back. Peter went up in the air. A woman can't handle that. So I said, see what I'm talking about? I said, I will take nothing less than the chairman of the FMC. And this went on for a couple more weeks. And Bob Novak, the very famous reporter, got wind of all this. And Bob was going to write a story about the White House with women. And on July, at the same time, I was fighting with Humble Oil then about going on their tanker that was going through the Northwest Passage on a trial run through ice. I said, we don't have a cabin for a woman. I said, I'm the best in the business. How can you not have it? Well, this was going on at the same time. I was having 2 fights because I was a woman. On about 10:30 on the morning of July 31st of 1969, I got a call from Humble Oil who said, we found a cabin for you. I said, fine, I'll be there. That afternoon, same afternoon, about 3:30 in the afternoon, I got a call from Peter Flanagan. Dear Peter, he said, would you like to be chairman of the Federal Maritime Commission? I said, I will, Peter, after I finish the trip on the Manhattan. And that was it. And President Nixon came out, and we had a White House thing. But it took a lot of battling. And
well, you had the grit, you had the determination to know what you wanted,
well,
ask for it.
I knew what I could do, and I was not going to, and I knew how I'd fought to achieve what I had. And I wasn't going to sit there and let some podunk guy from Ohio run an agency where I could only vote or say yes or I wasn't going to do it.
And you had the expertise to back it up.
And I did. And I was sworn in. I did the Manhattan trip. And that was another thing where, boy, I'll tell you, people don't know what women came through in those days. One day on the ship trip, there was a screw-up. There was one telephone on the whole ship for all of the reporters. There were about 10 reporters, 9 men and me, and the whole crew of the ship. There was one telephone on the ship at that. Remember, this was 1969. You didn't have satellite and all that stuff. And so one day, when I was dictating my story, Al Foreman, who was the rewrite guy at the Sun paper, couldn't hear what I was saying. I was trying to say the word reading, R-E-A-D-I-G. He couldn't hear it. I finally said, shit, Al. Well, a couple of the Humble Oil people heard that, okay? And they decided, we're going to get the press off of the telephone. So they come out. I saw the headline. They come out and said that the Federal Communications Commission had stopped all use of the telephone by the press. Well, you can imagine what the male reporters thought of me. And I got thinking about that. I said, you know, that's not the way the FCC acts. They don't do that like that. Somebody is playing tiddlywinks with me. And I confronted. And they admitted. But not until after the headlines. I haven't the newspaper yet. I have a paper. It shows that the FMC appointee to be swore on the telephone.
Like none of the men never did.
No, never did. And so when I confronted them, they admitted it. And I said, you owe me an apology. And all of you guys owe me an apology.
Good for you.
And they did, they apologized. So when I got off the ship in Anchorage, Alaska, and flew home. But the first thing I was hit with, again, was this story.
Right.
And everybody. And Al Foreman, who's still around, and Al and I still, I said, Al, can you spell the word reading? That's what I always said. Can you spell reading, Al? You got me in a lot of trouble. Anyhow, we have a lot of fun with it. But, and at the FMC, I had 4 male commissioners, and I had to take care of, fight with them.
You've broken through so many glass ceilings. You've been the first in so many ways, and having to deal with these kinds of attitudes that men just couldn't deal with, having a woman on board.
Well, you have to swallow your pride at times, but not give up on your determination. And when you know that what you have done is honorable, that what you have done is you've retained your integrity and you've been as accurate as possible, you can go ahead and fight. I didn't have to apologize for anything. I remember one time on the paper, I buried the wrong guy. This was a very famous Scarlett family here, which is a very famous family. And I knew them well, but somehow I got the William D.G. mixed up with maybe the George or something. And the paper, and that's the way it went in the paper. Well, I called the family up myself, and right off, as soon as I knew this, and I apologized to them. I said, I screwed up. Another time, an issue with Captain W.G.N. Ruckert, who was the founder of Ruckert Terminals. I had something wrong with the paper. I called him up immediately and said, I screwed up. And he said, you're admitting that? I said, yeah, I'm admitting it. I did it. I was wrong. He said, well, I've never heard of anybody doing that.
Unusual.
And I said, well, but I've never tried, I've always tried to be very honorable and honest, and I think that's helped.
And to be able to ask for what you want and not hold back. I think that's a wonderful lesson for women today.
Well, you know, I said earlier that I was very fond of my managing editor, Buck Dorsey, and I was. But Buck did not believe in paying women. And that was the one issue I had with him. When I asked for a raise, he would say, Helen, you don't need the money, you're a woman. Oh. I mean, he actually said that to me. I have it in writing on one thing. And when I think of that, that really upsets me more than anything. I was supporting my mother back in Nevada, and I was living here. And you know, my expenses were the same as any man's.
Of course.
But the men usually were married and they had a family. And Buck looked at that. He didn't look at whether I needed it. And actually, that is still a problem for women.
Absolutely.
That is still a problem for women. And
equal pay for equal work.
Even on Capitol Hill. Even on Capitol Hill. And I'm ashamed of many of those offices. If it's a woman who's chief of staff, in many cases she doesn't get as much as the male chief of staff might. That is wrong.
I agree.
And it's something that I will continue to espouse about and raise hell because it's wrong.
We all need to. All the women do.
All women need to. The other thing about women and this again I said, don't be a queen bee. You're not the only one. You got to help other women. You have to treat others as you would be treated. And I believed in that. And it's been said that everybody knows. Let me put it this way. One day on a 4th of July parade down in Dundalk, as I was walking along, I heard this woman's voice on the side, one of the audience. She said, "There goes Helen Bentley. I don't agree with her, but you always know where she stands." Now that I've never forgotten.
That's a true compliment.
And that is, I don't play games.
Mm-hmm.
I don't play games. I want to be honorable, and I want you to be honorable with me.
Well, in talking about the mentoring and so on, I know that you have been working with a group of women at the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Many people stood up and talked about how you were so helpful to them. What is that group that you, I think, didn't you basically start it?
It's the legislators. And I guess you might say that I was one of the earlier women in Maryland to become a legislator. Although there had been a few before, but as others were coming along, I tried to help them. And I always tried to I'd hired women. I hired a lot of women. My whole staff now, with the exception of Keith, are all women. And I'm helping young ladies go through college. They're working as interns, as paid interns for me. I want to see them succeed. I know how important it was for me, and I want others to be able to succeed.
Well, you certainly helped pave the way, and what a wonderful role model. Yeah.
I've had a lot of, I think of the young people that I've helped, male and female, and we had a lot of fun, and then I'll sit by myself and start laughing sometime because of the incidents that developed as we were doing things. And it's a lot of fun. And these young people are good young people. There was only, in my whole life, and I've hired a lot of people over the years, I've only had to dismiss 2.
Well, I'm sure that they benefited from your
I hope so.
many, many years of experience and the way you conducted yourself and so on.
There was one young man, now we're getting into politics a little bit here, but I have to, one young man came to me for a summer internship, and he was a liberal Democrat when he came in. Now we didn't espouse politics in the office. We just did what we should do. I voted as I felt I should, and I talked as I felt I should. But when this young man left, he was a conservative Republican at the end of the summer. I laughed and laughed. Now he has become an author. He's written a book or 2 on his experiences. He sailed on a ship, which I thought was funny. He went as a steward or something on a ship, and he wrote a book, prepared book on it. And it's been fun. I think of this young man a lot, because he was fun throughout his life. And, things happen. You have to reach out for them. There are 2 other major incidents of my life with the port that I think are very important to mention, because one was the fight for the 50-foot channel. I touched on it, but that was not easy. I had to run 3 times before I defeated Clarence Long, and that was the issue that I ran on. I strictly ran on the fact that the Port of Baltimore needed to have a 50-foot channel, or it was going to die. down the road, maybe not today, but in the future. And as I said, it took 3 campaigns. And on the 3rd campaign, even some of the Republicans questioned my sanity. A strong Republican ran against me in the primary, and I beat him. Incidentally, I like primary races because they always set you up for the general. And the issue on see, the federal government up to that point spent all of the money everywhere in the country on ship channels. But this was becoming a very expensive proposition. So the only way we could get legislation through was to agree then, and this was the last bill of the 99th Congress, and it had to do with ship channels and that expenditure. And we worked around the clock for 4 days and nights to get that legislation through, and so that it was acceptable. And we all agreed that at that point the local government should pay 25% of the cost and the feds would pay 75%. And that's what enabled that legislation to get through. That was in 1986, the last bill of the 99th Congress. Then we got our 50-foot channel, Baltimore, was finished by the end of 1988. If we hadn't have done that then, Baltimore would never have a 50-foot channel, because since then all of the restrictions on the environment, all of where you're going to put the material, etc., have gone into play. Baltimore would never have succeeded, and the expense to enable the 50-foot depth to be dug 150 miles. Captain Mike Watson, who was then head of the Maryland pilots, and I worked out an agreement where we would only dig half of the width of the channel, because we weren't going to have that many ships. That's another issue that's coming up in the near future, of the other half of the channel, because ships are many ships are now getting bigger. That was that issue. And the other was in 1988. Baltimore had an international reputation that it was the port that didn't work in the rain. And dear Governor William Donald Schaefer got so angry at labor, etc. And he said, hell, we don't need a port anymore. He was really ready to convert all of that waterfront property into development. And I said, Governor, let me get into the labor negotiations. Let me work on it. If I fail, then you do what you want. But I think we can save it, and we need to. We need the jobs. So he said, okay, go. So we started out labor negotiations on November the 22nd of 1988. And we went day and night for 8 weeks, except Christmas Day. It's the only day we didn't do it, to get that issue resolved and eliminate that clause in the contract that said the men didn't work in the rain. Extremely important today. Even once in a while we still hear that that's about the negative part of the Port of Baltimore. But we got it out. And we finished the contract on January 8th of 1989. And then, and I'll never forget this, for one day, some of the men struck. And I went, a lady you should never cry, but I went into tears because I thought, oh no, after all.
You worked so hard, yeah.
But we were able to get it out of the way real fast. Anyhow, those three issues: public agency, 50-foot channel, and changing the labor contract were the 3 points, that big points, major points, that I think I did for the port that has enabled Baltimore to
have
do
what
what
it
it's
is
doing
today.
today. Yeah.
And that's marvelous. Well,
Yeah.
it's aptly named.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely wonderful, your contributions, and to understand how it all came about. How challenging and tenacious you were to keep going forward.
It had to be. You know, we had to finish, these points had to be done. And I heard, I mean, I had tentacles all over the country and internationally too. So I knew what had to be done if we wanted to survive here.
Oh, well, all of your networking throughout the years with the paper and the organizations that you knew inside and out, that your knowledge was critical to.
It's important. It's important that I can pick up a telephone and call almost any shipping office, shipping executive in the world, and he'll answer the phone. Because my name is still, I still have a very good reputation.
Now that after you left public office, you have your own company.
I have my own company, a small company, but I operate my way. And I have maritime clients, I have defense contractors, and I have the patent office. The patent office, the guys that do all of the analyzing, they're the ones who issue the patents. Because I learned, the stories that I learned about the patent industry while I was in Congress.
Stay with us, we'll be right back. Helen, did your mother ever have a chance to witness your success?
Well, I would say yes. Mom came back several times while I was on the newspaper, but most importantly, she was here when I was sworn in as chairman of the Federal Maritime Commission, and which was a great event. And that was the first time, I think the jets were jet traffic was just getting going. And I have to mention that because the first time I crossed the United States was in a DC-3 back in 1941 when I was given the honor by the Elks of being named the #1 high school girl graduate. And they brought me from Ely, Nevada to Philadelphia. And we made stops. I got on the plane in Salt Lake, we stopped in Denver, we stopped in Chicago, and then we came to Philadelphia. But to imagine that you could fly from across country like that. But Mom made the jet flight. And she came back a couple of times after that. She enjoyed coming back.
I imagine she did, and knowing that her insistence that you get an education really paid off.
Yeah, she was very proud. I still have many of the letters and notes and that she and I used to exchange. Always in Serbian, she would write. Because she had immigrated in 1905. from that part of the world. It was not known as Serbia then. From a small niche that's no longer there called Slavonia. And
well, I think this is a powerful story.
She came in through the port of Baltimore.
That's amazing. So it really comes full circle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But to have this immigrant background, which is so typical of how our country was made.
Yes.
With the determination and the people who had the spunk to follow through with their dreams and make a new life, and to have her do this complete circle coming back to Baltimore had to be very rewarding for her.
And those people came, Baltimore was the #2 port for immigration at the turn of the 20th century.
Right.
From about 1890 to 1910 or 20, we were the #2 port. Her ship she was on, Hapag Lloyd ship, came into Locust Point. No, it was a North German Lloyd at that time, North German Lloyd line. And they docked at Locust Point. And the immigrants, there are a lot of photographs of immigrants coming into the port of Baltimore in those days. And they went up to near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to work in the mines. And her husband, who had preceded her, was killed in a mine accident up there not too long after she got here. And she was ready to return back home because there her parents had a nice farm. But the man who became my father talked her into staying here, and he married her. And then began, in those days, there were no government agencies to help people. Everybody had to do on their own. And what these immigrants would do then, to find jobs, let's say that the mine up in Pennsylvania closed down, one of them would go out on a scouting tour and would find work somewhere, and he'd send word back, and then they would go. And this is the way they crossed the country until they got to Nevada. They stopped in Utah, Garfield, Utah, for a while, because there was a lot of mining there. And then there was Nevada, Utah, and Arizona,
right,
which were prominent in mining, and Montana. And those immigrants went from camp to camp to camp.
Well, that's I think it's a wonderful story to bring to the front, because we have immigrants coming today that can see how we have, our foremothers and fathers have really made an impact here in our nation. And that's why we're the strong one we are. We've had a wonderful time here with Helen. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me.